On May 22nd, 2021, the first of many burial discoveries from Indigenous residential schools in Canada created an incredible wave of strong attention towards the true history of Indigenous people. As awful as these findings were, they were also validating the importance of recognizing and honoring Indigenous people and our experiences since settler colonialism. A month after these discoveries, the Government of Canada passed the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation. In the movement towards reconciliation efforts by society, businesses, organizations of all kinds. This has since created a very fast evolution. In this case, I'll call it the Indigenous Revolution. Now first, what is the Indigenous Revolution? Indigenous people and communities in Canada and the United States are revolutionizing the way we interact with each other, our beliefs, our values, the North American culture, which affects government, the economy, society, and all life. There are 5 areas that Indigenous Revolution is turning on its head. The first area of the Indigenous Revolution and what it's going to impact is Indigenous identity itself, especially within Indigenous communities. The second area is how organizations engage in truth and reconciliation. The third area is Canadian society and diversity overall. The fourth area is how we connect with each other, our relationships, and reconciliation. And the fifth area that the Indigenous Revolution is going to impact is education and knowledge systems. Before this episode starts, I have a small favor to ask from you. 89% of people who watch this channel don't subscribe. So if you've ever liked any of the videos we've posted, if you like this channel, can you please do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button? It helps the channel more than you know, and the bigger the channel gets, the better we can together make an impact towards Indigenous truth and reconciliation. Thank you and enjoy this episode. So the first area that Indigenous Revolution is going to impact is Indigenous identity itself, and especially within Indigenous communities. Now, what exactly is Indigenous identity? Identity in general is whatever you identify as or whatever you identify with. I am blank. I am a person that blank. I do this, I can't do that. However you identify, whatever you associate with, that is the broad definition of identity. Now, of course, identity is extremely complex, but for the purposes of this video, we're gonna dive into why I think that Indigenous Revolution is going to change Indigenous identity itself. Well, the Indigenous Revolution already has. As years and decades have gone by, people being more proud and accepted as being from Indigenous background, being First Nations, Inuit, Métis, tribal people, the recognition and identity associated with that and the shame that used to be associated with being of Indigenous background has transformed in the last few years. Of course, there are still areas of life where there's extreme racism and there's shame and imposter syndrome and a lot of the burden that comes with generational traumas. However, Indigenous identity has taken the forefront of being known for being proudly Indigenous, and Indigenous pride has amplified in the last few years for sure. Because Indigenous identity is being more accepted and is being transitioned into more of a pride movement, there are more people that are looking into their backgrounds, looking into their ethnicities and cultural backgrounds, and finding that they have Indigenous heritage in it. With that, it seems like there's a greater awareness and greater population of people who are identifying as Indigenous. This is causing people who have identified as Indigenous their entire lives to become somewhat defensive and is creating intercultural racism. So the entire idea of Indigenous identity and Indigenous communities, belonging, exclusivity, exclusion, and inclusion, there's a lot of impacts that the Indigenous Revolution is having. If you are someone who has just recently started embracing your Indigenous identity, it is quite the journey and it's not going to be smooth sailing. Especially if you are someone who is trying to connect with people from Indigenous backgrounds and you're trying to find like-minded people, tribal people. The experiences and areas of growth that are experienced along this journey are extremely broad, and the process of understanding your own identity and helping connect with other people who are also trying to understand and come to terms with and accept and explore their own Indigenous identity is very complex. It's amazing and an incredible journey, but it is definitely one that requires community and requires understanding, patience, and evolves over time. If you're an ally and you are trying to understand how Indigenous Revolution changes identity itself, it's important to bring the knowledge of identity for Indigenous people that you are interacting with might be extremely complex. So it's important to approach those people with grace and understand that their journey of understanding themselves, understanding their own identity might be triggering, it might be complicating, and it's important not to assume that they know stuff about themselves and to be understanding that their identity might be a careful subject to discuss with them specifically. I'd love to know if you agree with any of these areas that you think the Indigenous Revolution is going to impact. If there's anything that you think I left out, let me know in the comments. Now, the second way that the Indigenous Revolution is going to impact is how organizations engage in truth and reconciliation. Now, what exactly are organizations doing in truth and reconciliation? Since the Indigenous Revolution has really began, there's been a ton of more awareness and need and demand for organizations, corporations, any type of group for that matter, to pay special attention to Indigenous awareness, Indigenous people, try to learn and try to appreciate the true history of Indigenous people and build and repair those relationships. That's what Truth and Reconciliation really is all about. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action has specific action items that are calling upon different individuals, different people, and different ways that you can do this. Now, some things that organizations are doing to do their part in Truth and Reconciliation is really covered over a broad spectrum. There are things from Indigenous awareness training, there's cultural involvement, there's engaging and attending Indigenous events, there's bringing awareness to National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, bringing awareness to Orange Shirt Day, celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day on June 21st. There is so many different things that organizations are doing to appreciate and to recognize truth and reconciliation. Many organizations are trying to do their part. If you think about organizations and leaders of those organizations, they're just individual people, right? And they make decisions for their organization based on personal motives, whether they try to or not. It is human nature to find motives that are within you, which are personal to you. So leaders of organizations and members of different groups who are becoming aware of the urgency and of the importance and of the opportunity and of the right things to do. There are so many reasons, but who are becoming aware and making it a priority to engage in truth and reconciliation is causing a vast movement across the nation for organizations to get involved, to do their part, and to start to do the right thing by Indigenous people and communities. You can voice your opinions and share what other people are doing in their truth and reconciliation efforts and inspire people within organizations that you are a part of, whether it's extracurricular, clubs, schools, your work, any type of group. Inspire them to engage and do more and do their part in truth and reconciliation. Now, the third area that the Indigenous Revolution is going to impact is Canadian society and diversity overall. Now, what exactly is Canadian society and diversity? Well, nowadays you might identify Canada as a very multicultural society, which of course it is. And the diversity of Canada as a country is not only well known as being multicultural, but it is growing in its multiculturalism every single day. Now, everyone's experience within Canada is completely different, right? There's different territories, communities, nations all across Turtle Island. Why I think that the Indigenous Revolution is going to change Canadian society and diversity overall? Well, Canadian society for my childhood experience consisted of you are Canadian or you are Native, right? It depends on where you're from. But where I grew up, you were either Native or non-Native. There was no other identity or group in the region that I grew up. Since Indigenous history is becoming more well-known with Indigenous Revolution and the country is diversifying more, Canada is becoming even more multicultural. This means that Canadian society and Canadians will connect with their pre-settler identity even more. This is a good thing because as Canadians are becoming more aware, more educated about what their Canadian settler identity means and understanding the backgrounds of their family history, it will inspire more people to look into their identity, their Indigenousness from where they came from before settling in Canada. I believe it's incredibly valuable for individuals to connect with who they are, their family history, what makes them them, and it only allows you to be more spiritual, connect with your purpose, and feel more rooted in your ancestral family tree. If you're an ally, this means take the steps to look into your family history, look into your identity and your cultural background so that if you're trying to be a stronger, more supportive ally for Indigenous people and communities in your life, you'll have that information to bring to conversations and bring to the table when you are engaging with your Indigenous friends. Now, the fourth area that the Indigenous Revolution is going to impact is how we connect with each other, relationships, and reconciliation. What exactly is connection and relationships and reconciliation? What does this have to do with anything? What I'm talking about is relationship building, friendships, connecting with each other, sharing information. Now, of course, these are all the foundation for reconciliation, right? Now, why do I think the Indigenous Revolution is going to change the way that people connect with each other, the way that they build relationships, and reconciliation as a result? Is because as more people are becoming aware of Indigenous people and the values and worldviews that Indigenous nations hold so dear and that they appreciate in the way that they see the world, these are becoming more well known. Some of the core beliefs of Indigenous worldview are things like interconnectivity of all life, balance of all life, inclusion and value of all things on Mother Earth. Now, these beliefs and understanding these beliefs and how valuable they are will help people to adopt those beliefs, adopt those values, and integrate some of those values and beliefs into the way that they live their lives as well. More awareness brought to Indigenous worldview will help people who are not only of Indigenous background, but of settler identity to understand the importance and the power in interconnectivity, in appreciating Mother Nature and appreciating diversity and inclusion and valuing all nations and their proximity to the Creator and all the beautiful things that Indigenous teachings and worldview can help you with personally. This appreciation and understanding is going to help not only the relationship and reconciliation between Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people, but reconciliation of man and Mother Nature as well. This means embracing and learning and leaning in to more Indigenous teachings and knowledge systems and using them to help me build connections and help me to understand what other people's values and beliefs are, and helping build relationships and connections with other people whose journey I could potentially impact and they could potentially impact and support mine as well. As an ally, these beliefs can help you to gather information from Indigenous people that you can learn and appreciate Indigenous heritage from. It can also help you to understand your own values and beliefs that you want to pull from that might be similar to your own cultural background, and how there might be overlaps and similarities with Indigenous cultural teachings and Indigenous worldview and spirituality and personal development that can help you achieve your goals, help you be more resilient and be a stronger, better person and happier and all those incredible things. Now, the fifth area that the Indigenous Revolution is going to impact is education and knowledge systems. Now, what exactly is education and knowledge systems? This is formal education, so schooling, and knowledge systems like how we learn through storytelling, our parents reading us books, learning from experiences, any which way that you learn or acquire knowledge. And the system with which that is embodied is education and knowledge systems. Indigenous knowledge is based on storytelling, of course. There's that reason why the Indigenous Revolution is going to change the way that people learn, because people are going to become more aware of the value of storytelling and how the traditional Indigenous knowledge system was based on oral storytelling and things not being written down or books, that all knowledge was passed down through stories that were spoken around the campfire, not written in books. But sometimes there are certain power-driven bodies or groups of people in place who really manipulate the education system. Now, why do you think Indigenous history was kept a secret and generations of Canadian students were lied to, right? There's a lot of things that make information more accessible that weren't in place before, and that is what's partially responsible for this change in education and knowledge system. Like social media, public blogs, the media landscape as a whole is now public domain essentially. However, the Indigenous community being revolutionized has inspired so many Indigenous voices to become amplified. This has created massive audiences that are extremely influential for change. Indigenous voices are now able to change and influence what people want to learn about, which never could have seemed possible before, with the traditional education system and Indigenous history being completely cut out and not allowed to be shared. You have the freedom to talk about your culture and talk about your family's stories and values and beliefs and our cultural teachings that are extremely valuable and useful for healing. It's exciting and allows people to have access to knowledge that can help them heal, help them understand themselves. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. If you're an ally, it means that you have access to learn a lot of cultural teachings and stories and traditions that Indigenous people have been kind of keeping a secret because they had to, because it wasn't allowed to be shared. Now, what this also means if you're an ally is that you have to understand that when there are communities or groups that aren't overly enthusiastic to share their cultural knowledge, that it is a direct result of the history of colonization and fear, because before it wasn't allowed to be shared. Now, the fear and trauma, generational trauma that colonization has created within Indigenous communities has created a gatekeeping movement that is in full force. Now, what this means if you're an ally, and even if you are mixed background, Indigenous background, you likely have crossed paths or experienced gatekeeping, and as a result, maybe felt uninspired or afraid to learn because of this. Now, for me, I am a huge proponent of sharing knowledge, allowing people to access Indigenous cultural teachings who want to learn about cultural heritage, who want to learn about cultural teachings, who want to learn about Indigenous worldview, about smudging, about medicine wheel, about these teachings that can really, really help you to be a better person, to help you to understand yourself, connect with your friends, help yourself heal in any way that is to do good. Now, let me know what you think about these 5 areas that the Indigenous Revolution is going to impact, which ones you agree with, which ones you don't agree with. If you think I left anything out, let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.